We are all wounded. Every single one of us carries a wound of some kind. For some people, the wound might be visible. It may appear as a physical disability or an illness that the outside world notices. But for others, the wound is hidden. It lives within our insecurities, our fears, our struggles, our shame, and all the painful stories we carry around about ourselves. So regardless of how our wounds appear, they are all expressions of the same archetype, the same archetypal reality. And this is the realm of Chiron. On June 19th, Chiron enters the sign of Taurus for the first time in 50 years. It will remain in Taurus until September 17th, when it will briefly retrograde back into Aries. And then on April 14th, 2027, Chiron returns to Taurus, where it will remain until 2034. So this transit really marks the beginning of a profound collective shift in what humanity is being asked to heal. For the last 8 years, since 2018, Chiron has been moving through the sign of Aries, and it's been confronting us with wounds surrounding willpower, our identity, how we assert ourselves, and whether or not we believe we have a right to exist. But as Chiron enters Taurus, the focus will change. So the question will no longer be, do I have the right to be here? The question will become, do I believe I am enough? Do I believe I am worthy? So over the next 7 years, this question will move to the forefront of both our personal and our collective experience. The wounds we carry will manifest through the theme of self-worth. So before we explore more of what Chiron and Taurus means, and how these themes may show up in our lives, we need to understand Chiron itself. Who is Chiron? Why does this small planetary body carry such an important symbolic meaning to us all? And why has the story of this wounded centaur endured for thousands of years as one of the most powerful symbols of healing we've ever known? So to answer these questions, we really need to begin by looking at Chiron's position in the sky, and also looking at the myth before we dive into the astrology. Because Chiron's story really exists in all of these things. It's in astronomy, the myth, and astrology. And together they reveal something really essential about the human experience. So let's look at the astronomy of Chiron. So astronomically speaking, Chiron is really just fascinating. It's classified as both an asteroid and a comet. So it's really something of a hybrid between the two. So in fact, this is the very reason the name Chiron was chosen at the time of its discovery by the astronomer who discovered it, because it represents the hybrid comet asteroid, just like the wise centaur Chiron in Greek mythology, half man, half horse. So even in astronomy, Chiron occupies a space between worlds, part asteroid, part comet, neither one nor the other. Now, Chiron was discovered in 1977, so it's fairly recent. And it was discovered while moving through the sign of Taurus, actually at 3 degrees, 8 minutes of Taurus. So that means that anyone born between 1977 and 1984 will be experiencing their Chiron return as Chiron travels through Taurus over the next several years. So in other words, Chiron will return to the exact position it was at their time of birth. So for these people, this will be even more deeply significant period of time, a period of healing and self-discovery. But no matter what, we're all going to feel Chiron and Taurus in profound ways. Chiron has an interesting orbit. So unlike traditional planets, Chiron travels entirely between Saturn and Uranus, which is also highly symbolic. Saturn represents structure, responsibility, time, and the realities and limitations of our physical existence. Saturn governs the rules of life and really all the structures that hold society together. Uranus represents something very different. It seeks freedom, where Saturn seeks order. It rebels, where Saturn conserves. It disrupts, where Saturn stabilizes. So Uranus pushes us toward liberation, innovation, and freedom more than any other planet. And between these two planets sits Chiron, kind of acting as the bridge, the mediator, the archetype that attempts to reconcile what appears to kind of be irreconcilable. So in many ways, Chiron represents the process of reconciling the two different extremes represented by Saturn and Uranus, two different extremes within ourselves. It teaches us how to honor the realities of our human limitations, but still pursue growth and freedom. So it reminds us that healing is not about escaping our wounds. It's really about integrating them in order to become whole. So Chiron's orbit also reflects this symbolism because its path is highly elliptical. It's irregular and unpredictable. It crosses the orbits of both Saturn and Uranus, as I mentioned, and it also moves through the zodiac at an uneven pace. So it spends in some signs less than 2 years and then nearly 9 in other signs. So its complete cycle around the zodiac takes approximately 50 to 51 years. So just like healing itself, Chiron does not move in a straight line. Its journey is winding and unpredictable. So to truly understand Chiron, let's leave astronomy for a minute and let's move into the realm of myth before we really delve into the astrology. The myth is where we encounter the wounded healer. So Chiron's story begins with a wound. According to Greek mythology, Chiron was born to Kronos, whom the Romans later called Saturn, interesting, and a sea nymph named Philyra. But Chiron's conception was not born from love. Kronos deceived Philyra in order to possess her and mate with her. He was going to do it no matter what. And in an attempt to conceal the affair from his wife, Rhea, he transformed himself into a stallion. So he became a horse. So the union took place through disguise, deception, and really primal animal instinct. And from their union came Chiron, born half man, half horse, half civilized, half wild. So when Philyra saw her child and looked, she was horrified by the monster she saw before her. She was so ashamed and unable to accept him, she abandoned him. So some versions of the myth even go so far as to say she was so overwhelmed by her shame that she begged the gods to transform her into a linden tree. So imagine this symbolism. Chiron's own mother would rather become a tree than face the reality of having to raise him. So while his mother rejected him, his father completely disappeared. So before Chiron ever knew who he was, he learned what it felt like to be unwanted. And I really think perhaps this is where many of us first meet Chiron in our own lives. Not necessarily through literal abandonment, but through the experience of feeling unseen, feeling misunderstood, even feeling rejected because we're different in some way. And we might feel unwanted because of that. So here, the original wound of the neglectful mother and the weak father shows up. Many of our deepest wounds do originate in childhood, long before we have the language and the ability to understand what's happening. So a parent, if they're emotionally unavailable or our household was somehow chaotic and unpredictable, a wound may happen as a result. We're feeling that love must be earned, or we might feel, that something is fundamentally wrong with us. And these experiences become the foundation of the core wound, the Chiron wound. And then like Chiron, we learn to survive. We have to learn how to protect ourselves. And sometimes we spend years trying to become worthy of the love we never received from our parents or our caregivers. So fortunately, though, Chiron's story does not end there. After being abandoned by his parents, he was orphaned until he was eventually taken in, basically adopted, by the sun god Apollo, who's the god of light, healing, prophecy, wisdom. And under Apollo's guidance, Chiron flourished. He became a physician, a philosopher, a healer, and a teacher. He was, eventually became known as the wisest of all centaurs. He became a prophet. And heroes would travel to him for guidance. Kings would seek his wisdom. Warriors would learn from his teachings. And among some of his students were some of the greatest figures in Greek mythology. And that includes Achilles, Jason, and Hercules. So despite all of Chiron's gifts, he still carried an unhealed wound deep within himself, really forever trying to compensate for his animal nature by becoming more civilized, by performing more civilized duties. And then fate delivered another wound. One day, during a battle involving wild centaurs, Hercules accidentally struck Chiron with a poisoned arrow. The arrow had been dipped in the venom of the Hydra, which was a monstrous serpent whose poison was incurable. The wound pierced Chiron's lower body, the animal half of his nature. And this symbolism is so significant because the wise healer was wounded in the place where instinct, survival, and really like raw feeling reside, raw animalistic feeling. So he was symbolically split in two by the accidental wound, forever divided into two halves, with his top half a wise healer and his bottom half a wounded animal. He was both wounded and wise at the same time. And then another interesting thing about the story is the fact that Chiron was wounded by his own student, Hercules, in what was a tragic accident. So this idea of an accidental wound shows up around the story of Chiron. And, we have to remember, people don't always mean to wound us. Some wounds inflicted upon us, or which we have inflicted upon others, are not done on purpose. And so our Chiron wound might show up out of a completely accidental event. Now, because Chiron was immortal, he could not die. The poison remained, the pain remained, the wound remained forever, essentially. And this is the central paradox of the Chiron myth. Chiron knew every healing art. He possessed immense wisdom. He could heal others, yet he could not heal himself. And isn't this often true of all of us human beings? Like, how often do we offer compassion to others while really withholding it from ourselves? How often do we give advice we desperately need to hear? How often do we understand the source of our pain, maybe intellectually, but we just struggle to transform it emotionally? So the Chiron myth reminds us that wisdom and woundedness can actually coexist. And in fact, they often do, because sometimes the people who help others heal are actually those who have suffered the most. And, that's because the reality is suffering can really deepen our wisdom and our capacity for empathy. So eventually Chiron chose to relinquish his immortality in order to free Prometheus from his eternal torment and then end his own agony. So through surrender, he found peace. And through his suffering, he became immortalized as the archetype we still recognize today, the wounded healer, the one whose pain becomes wisdom, the one whose suffering becomes compassion, the one whose wound becomes a doorway to transformation. So this is why Chiron really matters. Chiron is not simply a mythological figure. Chiron is a living reality within each of us. The place where we hurt, the place where we feel broken, the place where we compensate, but also the place where we hold our greatest gift. And the potential for the most healing and growth resides in this core Chiron wound. So the wound is not the end of the story. It's really where the story begins. The wound is the place where the light enters you. That's a quote by Rumi, who I just love that quote and feel it sums up Chiron perfectly. So let's now talk astrology. So to understand where we're going with Chiron and Taurus, we first have to understand where we've been. So since 2018, Chiron has been moving through the sign of Aries. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. Aries is the sign of birth itself. It's the primal spark within us that says, I am, I exist. So it really governs individuality, initiative, our right to exist as a separate and unique human being. And at its highest expression, Aries teaches us how to trust ourselves, how to take action, how to move through life with confidence and authenticity, and personal sovereignty. But Chiron's job is never to show us where we're already strong. Its job is to reveal where we're wounded. So during its journey through Aries, Chiron has really exposed some of our deep collective wounds around our identity, our self-assertion, our personal agency. So over the last 8 years, many of us, I know myself included, have been asking ourselves difficult questions like, who am I really? What do I actually want? Why am I so afraid of disappointing others? Why do I keep abandoning myself to gain approval? Why am I afraid to take up space? Why do I struggle to trust myself and my own instincts? And for some of us, these wounds surfaced through our relationships with others. Could have been career changes, family dynamics, like personal crises, just major life transitions. And beneath the surface, the lesson has been really similar. Humanity has been learning to reclaim itself. We've been learning to stop looking for permission to exist. We've been learning how to trust our own instincts again. And I think there's nowhere this lesson has been more visible than through the rise of social media and really our increasing digital lives. Think about how much that has increased since 2018. Since Chiron entered Aries, the relationship between our identity and our visibility has become blurred. And it's really transformed dramatically. So today, many of us live our lives. We live in a world where our existence is constantly being reflected back to us through screens. Like we're constantly sharing our opinions. We're sharing our achievements. We're sharing our struggles. We document our lives in ways that previous generations never could or never even thought possible. And in many ways, we have become both like creators and the end product. So we create and we become the product of what we create. We're becoming personal brands. And this has created opportunities for self-expression, but it's also, amplified our deepest wounds. The pressure to be seen, the fear of being judged, the need for validation, and this tendency to always compare our lives against carefully curated versions of other people's realities. We're always comparing ourselves. So for many people, Chiron and Aries has revealed how fragile our sense of self can become if we're solely reliant on external approval. So the more we seek validation from the outside of ourselves, the more disconnected we become from our own inner authority. And as a result, we've really seen a lot of collective wounds around self-esteem, authenticity, belonging, personal identity. And we've also witnessed, this growing conversation around personal freedom and really like the right to live authentically. These are all the themes that have arisen with Chiron and Aries. So at its core, Chiron's journey through Aries has really just asked us a simple question. Can you be yourself? Not the version others expect you to be, not the version that earns approval, not the version designed to avoid criticism, but the real you. Can you trust yourself enough to live from that place? And I think for many people, myself included, the answer has not come easily. Because before we can claim our individuality, we have to confront the fears that prevent us from doing so. The fears of rejection, of failure, of standing alone, and really the fear of being seen for who we truly are. And Chiron and Aries has brought all of these wounds into the light. It's exposed the places within ourselves where we've, really abandoned ourselves. But through this exposure, healing has been possible. So think back to 2018 and think about all of the ways you've changed, the boundaries you've set for yourself, the risks you've taken, the conversations you've had that have not been easy. Have you learned to speak up for yourself? Have you become more willing to trust your own judgment without having to rely on others to tell you what to do and who to be? And even if your growth has been really messy or hard, the chances are you're not the same person you were 8 years ago. Somewhere along the way, you've likely developed a much stronger relationship with your own courage. You probably learned that confidence is needed in spite of fear. It's the willingness to act no matter what. And that's been one of our greatest gifts with Chiron and Aries is self-trust. It's not something we're always born with. It's something we have to develop by repeatedly choosing authenticity and choosing ourselves. Now the lesson's changing because once we've begun to discover who we are, another question naturally kind of follows. If I know who I am, do I believe I have value? Or in other words, am I worthy? And this is where Taurus enters the story. So Chiron and Taurus is really going to change everything. Because Aries, like we said, is concerned about existence, our right to exist. Taurus is concerned about our worth. Are we worthy? So Aries asked us, do I have the right to be here? And Taurus now will ask, now that I'm here, do I believe I deserve to thrive? And this is a very different kind of wound that's going to be surfacing and coming up. And in many ways, it's a little more nuanced and deeply rooted. So because Aries wounds revolve around identity and action, Taurus wounds revolve around survival, security, resources, self-worth, and the body. It's really our relationship with the material world. So Taurus is the part of us that seeks stability. I mean, it wants solid ground beneath its feet. It wants food on the table, money in the bank, a safe and secure home, a healthy body. It wants a sense of peace and permanence. Taurus wants to know that life is dependable and that tomorrow will be okay, that we will have enough. So when Chiron moves through the sign of Taurus, we can expect wounds surrounding these themes to come to the forefront of our awareness. Many of these wounds will originate from lack and scarcity. Not necessarily actual lack, but the fear of lack. The fear that there won't be enough. There won't be enough money. There won't be enough security. There won't be enough love. There won't be enough support. There won't be enough resources. So for some people, this might manifest through actual money and financial challenges, changing of like economic circumstances. But for others, it could be struggles with self-worth. It could be body image issues, feeling of inadequacy, or really, that we're undeserving of abundance. Some may discover that no amount of external success can compensate for the deep internal belief that they are not enough. Because really at its deepest level, Taurus is not really about money, even though money comes up a lot with Taurus. The deeper question in Taurus is value. So it's, what do I value and why do I value it? And perhaps really most importantly, do I value myself? That's the question in Taurus. So this is why Chiron's ingress into Taurus really represents such a significant turning point for humanity, because the lesson is no longer about claiming our identity. The lesson is about embodying our worth. A lot of people know who they are, but I think far fewer genuinely believe that they deserve what they have, that they deserve love and stability and everything that they seek. So really over the next 7 years, Chiron will challenge us to examine every single place where we've attached our worth to something on the outside, to external circumstances. And this includes things like, yes, our income, our possessions, our appearance, our talents, our achievements, our status, our ability to meet other people's expectations. And so as these attachments start to be exposed in one way or another, we're going to discover that true security cannot be found on the outside. Anything external can be lost. I mean, money can disappear, jobs can change, markets can collapse, relationships can end, circumstances in life can shift overnight. So if our sense of self-worth depends entirely upon what we possess, what we own, and our security will always be vulnerable, because Chiron in Taurus asks us something deeper. It wants us to be stronger than that. It wants us to have a sense of value that is permanent and cannot be taken away. A relationship with ourselves that remains intact and whole regardless of circumstances on the outside. Our worth is inherent. It's not earned or found on the outside. So this is the ultimate quest of Chiron and Taurus. There's going to be huge healing opportunities. I mean, literally, opportunities of a lifetime to change the core of who we are, to no longer let our value be manipulated because of fear of what we might lose. Learning to trust our worth, not settling for less than what we deserve. And a society that understands true value begins making very different choices about resources and land and wealth and nature, and living in balance with the earth. So this starts with the individual and trickles outward. So Chiron and Taurus, it wants us to heal, to answer that question. What are we healing? We have to understand another really important thing about Taurus. Taurus, like I said, it's often associated with money and possessions and material comfort, but Taurus is so much deeper than that. Really, at its core, Taurus deals with not what we value, but how we value it. So it wants, us to feel that we can survive, be secure, be worthy, and have a healthy relationship with the physical world. Because Taurus wants to feel grounded. It wants to feel safe. It really wants to feel supported. And it wants to feel connected to the earth and nature and life itself. So when Chiron comes in to the picture, it's going to expose the places where those connections have been wounded. I mean, those wounds run so deep, and we're talking about not just personal wounds, but wounds society carries around our relationship with this beautiful planet we live on and where we've abused it. So this is going to be really significant, this wound. And then also the wound around our worthiness. So many people have, a belief, it might be unconscious or suppressed, but they carry around beliefs about themselves that they're not enough. They're not attractive enough. They're not lovable enough. They're not deserving, and these beliefs operate under the surface of our conscious awareness, but they still become the lens through which we interpret all life situations. So, we start to believe we're not enough. Our successes might feel temporary. Love might feel conditional. No matter how much we accomplish, we're never truly happy. There remains this really nagging sense that something is still missing or something still needs to be proven. So Chiron in Taurus has a way of bringing up these unconscious beliefs we carry about ourselves. It's going to bring those up over the coming years. And we really might start to become very aware of where we've tied our value to material success. So if we've measured our worth through our income or through our career, through our appearance, through our accomplishments, or even through what other people want us to be, Chiron is going to ask us, if all these things were taken away from you, would you still know your value? It's a big question. Because true self-worth cannot be built on any of these things. It does not depend on what you have, what you own. It doesn't depend on what you do. It doesn't depend on how others see you. It must arise from something that's already within us. And this is the healing journey of Chiron in Taurus. Now, I mentioned earlier, closely tied to this idea of self-worth is the wound around lack and scarcity that Chiron is going to bring up for us. So scarcity is not simply about a lack of resources. It's really a state of consciousness. It's the feeling that we will never be enough or have enough. That we won't have enough time, we won't have enough opportunities, we won't have enough security, we won't have enough money. And when we're always in fear of these things, we're never going to have enough. So we're trapped in these cycles of fear, and it can make us unconsciously want to do more of the things that we think will compensate for what we believe we're lacking. And this can show up as behaviors so then we go overwork, or we overgive, we overspend, we start hoarding resources. We're constantly worrying about the future. We're never living in the present. So even when life is stable, our nervous system remains consistently braced for loss. It's always expecting disappointment. We can never relax or be at peace. So this wound is often finds its roots in childhood experiences. Like if we grew up in financial insecurity, or we experienced emotional like deprivation, or living in unpredictable environments, or witnessing instability within the family system, the child learns that safety is fragile. Safety is not sustainable. And the lesson can remain active within us for decades, well into adulthood and sometimes the rest of our lives. So yes, we're going to have to confront old childhood wounds as Chiron moves through Taurus. We might, have to confront a lot of unconscious survival fears we've adopted throughout life. And these situations may involve money, employment, housing, stability, resources, anything like that that triggers anxieties within us might show up. But this is ultimately to reveal to us where healing is still needed. So we're learning that to heal lack and scarcity is really not about acquiring more. It's about developing trust, both within ourselves, but also trust in life. And understanding that when circumstances change, our worth doesn't have to change. That's really big. That's the huge theme that we're all about to undergo in our lives. So as Chiron journeys through Taurus, it is going to bring our attention to money. But again, money is only part of the story because money serves as a mirror, I think, to deeper psychological issues. So for some people, money represents freedom and safety. And so during this transit, we really might be forced to examine our relationship, our emotional attachment and relationship with money and wealth. What does money mean to us? Why do we want it? And we have to ask ourselves, what fears arise when we don't feel like we have enough money? So, and then the other thing is, can we separate our net worth from our self-worth? That's huge. And this distinction, figuring this out is critical. It's one of the deeper wounds where we have to unconsciously understand what's going on, in the unconscious, as far as why fears arise when our bank account rises and falls, or when the material world fluctuates. Chiron in Taurus is going to really challenge us to redefine the idea of what abundance and wealth means to us. To understand, is it stability, contentment? Why do we want money? That's the question. Our relationship with money will be changing. Over the next 7 years, many people might discover that abundance is really less about accumulating more and more about needing less. That's the beauty of this energy. So Taurus is also an earth sign. And so because of its deep connection to the physical world, it also is associated with our physical bodies. So as Chiron and Taurus might bring our attention to our relationship with our physical selves more than, than we've experienced in the past. Like for some people, this may manifest through body image issues. For others, it could be illness and health concerns, or physical discomfort or trauma stored within the body rising to the surface. But because a lot of us have become disconnected from our bodies, like we live in our minds, we rush through our days, we ignore the body's signals, we ignore our exhaustion, we suppress our emotions. We really just override what the body needs. So eventually the body begins to speak louder because it's trying to get our attention. So Taurus reminds us that healing is not just psychological and emotional. It's also physical. It's sensory. It's embodied. So sometimes healing begins not through mental insight, Like really, it can just happen through physical rest, by slowing down, by nourishing ourselves, by reconnecting with the wisdom that lives within our body. This is going to be so important over the coming years. Developing a much deeper relationship with our physical well-being, what we feed ourselves and how we treat our body, learning to listen to our body rather than push it, learning to nurture our body rather than punish it, learning to inhabit our body rather than trying to constantly escape it, because we're not separate from our body, and healing through the body is a primary pathway during Chiron in Taurus over the next 7 years. So, you know, another thing that's going to be coming up is Taurus is deeply connected to the earth, like I mentioned, but that specifically like land, food, agriculture, natural resources, property, housing, the earth itself. So as Chiron moves through Taurus, wounds surrounding these issues may become increasingly visible collectively. So questions about like resource distribution may arise. We may see pressing issues around economic stability, housing affordability, food systems, environmental debates, and land ownership, because the natural world may become one of the major areas of focus for all of us. And we may be forced to look at how we've abused our planet, as I mentioned earlier. So, because when the earth is unhealthy, we as a people are also unhealthy. And this is going to be a time of reckoning, of having to come face to face with the damages we've caused, how we've used Earth's resources that have been entrusted to us. You know, we might have to ask ourselves, if we're living in balance with nature, are we taking more than we give? Are our current systems sustainable? Have we forgotten our connection to the earth that sustains us? Without the earth, we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be alive. Taurus reminds us we're not separated from nature. We're part of it. And Chiron reveals where this connection has been wounded. So when we become disconnected from all the living creatures, animals, the earth, we become disconnected from ourselves. And we might feel more called over the next 7 years to really start to reconnect with the natural world during this transit, to spend more time outdoors in nature, to grow our own food, to simplify our lives, you know, to have greater self-sufficiency, to develop a deeper appreciation for animals and all the living systems that support life. Chiron and Taurus will teach us that true wealth is not just about financial security. It is about our relationships with ourselves, with our bodies, with our resources, with our communities, and with the earth itself. We will be healing these relationships. And then, you know, I think with every Chiron wound, there is a beautiful gift waiting to be discovered. And in Taurus, this gift is the gift of self-value. This is the gift of self-trust. This is the gift of reconnecting to the body, of being embodied, of no longer fearing survival. It's the gift of inner security. So if we've been too attached to material validation, we're going to be discovering something else, something that matters more. And that lies within us. It's not easy. It lies within our pain. So our pain, we don't have to run from it. I mean, it's the only way out is through. It's through the pain. So I think the greatest lesson of Chiron and Taurus is that you do not become valuable. You already are. The healing comes when you finally believe this. So I'm going to leave it at that. I wish you guys a wonderful month ahead. And if you are interested in learning more about me and the services I offer, You can check out my website, taramcgillicuddy.astrology.com. I will also leave a link in the description below, and I'll be back soon with another video. Take care.